You stand in the doorway, keys heavy in your hand. The hinges give the smallest groan as you push the door shut behind you. For the first time, you notice how final that click of the lock sounds when there's no one else inside. No voice calling your name, no second pair of shoes by the mat. Just you. The air hangs differently here, still and weighted, holding its breath as if it too is waiting to see what you'll do. This is the threshold, the edge where you cross into a life lived without a man, and every fiber of your being feels it. At first, the silence presses in so tightly it feels unnatural. You listen harder than usual, straining for sounds beyond the hum of the refrigerator or distant traffic outside. Every creak of the floorboards feels amplified. Every shift of the walls settling at night feels like a question. Is this safety or exposure? There's no one else to check. No voice to dismiss it with casual reassurance. Alone, you become your own witness, your own guard. You walk from room to room, noticing how space feels bigger without another presence occupying it. The living room expands like a stage waiting for a performance. The kitchen becomes a laboratory stripped of its usual chaos. Your bedroom feels like both sanctuary and cage. Each corner looks different now, as though you're seeing it for the first time. You wonder if solitude actually changes the geometry of walls. Yet underneath the unease, there's a spark of something else, an electric pulse of possibility. You realize that every decision belongs solely to you. No negotiations, no compromises. The thermostat is set where you like it. The dishes can sit until morning, and no one will judge. The bed, wide and waiting, no longer has a favored side. Freedom and emptiness mingle, and you struggle to tell them apart. As the night wears on, you catch yourself in small rituals of adjustment. Double-checking the lock, pulling curtains tighter than necessary, turning lights on in unused rooms as if to create company out of brightness. You're not paranoid, you're simply aware. Living alone sharpens instincts in ways that couples rarely notice. You are both queen and guard of this kingdom. The crown feels heavy, but it fits. Then there are the thoughts. They arrive quickly, cascading, filling every pocket of silence with their own voices. Some are sharp. Will anyone notice if something happens to me? Others are gentle. I can finally read without interruption. The mind becomes louder when unshared. You find yourself talking to it, as though it were a roommate, testing its answers against your heartbeat. You understand in a flash why people fear solitude, because it strips away distraction and leaves you exposed to yourself. The first night is the hardest, because it carries the weight of the unknown. You wonder if you've made a mistake, if this choice will harden into regret or blossom into independence. You measure time differently. Minutes feel longer when no one breaks them with laughter or conversation. Even meals stretch, each bite echoing in a quiet kitchen. But you also catch yourself savoring them more slowly, tasting with full attention because no other voice pulls you away. As you prepare to sleep, the house hums around you. Shadows shift across the ceiling. Familiar objects cast strange shapes in the dark. You hear the water in the pipes, the sigh of the wind outside, and every sound seems to carry a message. You are alone now. This is your life. It's not a condemnation, but an invitation. Solitude asks you who you are when no one else is watching. Your hand hovers over the lamp, hesitant to plunge the room into full darkness. In that hesitation lies the truth of living alone. Courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. You exhale, turn the light off, and lie back. The sheets whisper against your skin, and you're struck by the realization that this bed, this silence, this space belongs entirely to you. It feels both like exile and arrival. The threshold is crossed in moments like these, when you finally understand that the life you're about to live will be shaped not by compromise, but by your own hand. The first night isn't just about sleeping alone. It's about confronting the enormity of freedom and the shadows it casts. As your eyes close, somewhere between fear and relief, you begin to glimpse the deeper truths waiting beyond the silence. The first morning comes slowly. Light slips through the blinds without ceremony, illuminating dust particles that dance in the air. You wake to silence, not the muffled sound of another person's breathing, not the shuffle of feet on the floorboards, not the faint clatter of breakfast being made elsewhere. Only silence, stretching wide and patient. For the first time, you realize how much of your old mornings were shaped by someone else's rhythms. Without them, you're left with a blank canvas. You roll out of bed, and the floor feels cooler, sharper beneath your feet. The air is yours alone, carrying the faint smell of the sheets, the quiet hum of your devices, and the delicate rustle of curtains shifting with the breeze. Everything waits for you. No one has touched the coffee pot. No one has used the shower. The toothpaste cap is exactly where you left it. This predictability feels strange at first, then deeply satisfying. Every detail reflects your choices and no one else's. You put the kettle on and listen to the water boil, noticing how loud the bubbling seems when there's no conversation to drown it out. You pour your drink, sit at the table, and realize the luxury of unbroken thought. The morning is no longer an obstacle course of compromise. Who showers first? Who gets the car? Whose schedule dictates the pace? Instead, you discover the pleasure of shaping time to your liking. This is freedom's first taste, the rush of small decisions that accumulate into sovereignty. You choose what plays on the speakers, if anything plays at all. You decide whether breakfast is an elaborate ritual or a simple slice of bread. You leave the dishes undone, and there's no silent judgment across the table. Every action is both permission and rebellion. But freedom has a texture you didn't expect. It's exhilarating, yes, but it's also fragile. You notice how quickly you seek to fill it, scrolling through your phone, texting someone just to prove you're not invisible. Independence feels lighter when witnessed. Yet when you resist that urge and sit fully in the quiet, you taste something sharper, the raw, unfiltered presence of your own life. Throughout the day, freedom reveals itself in subtle layers. You walk through your space without explanation. You change clothes in the living room because no one is watching. You eat dinner at midnight because hunger, not a clock, guides you. You sing out loud, off-key, to music that only you enjoy. In these small acts, you notice something profound. You're not waiting for permission. Still, the world outside doesn't always celebrate your independence. When you mention living alone, some people tilt their heads in pity, others in curiosity, and some in judgment. They ask questions like, "Don't you get lonely? Aren't you scared?" As if solitude itself were a problem to be solved. Yet you begin to realize that their reactions say less about you and more about their own fear of facing themselves without distraction. Freedom's first taste is sweet, but it also awakens old shadows. In the evenings, when you return to the quiet apartment, you feel the echo of companionship missing. A joke without laughter, a meal without conversation, a story with no audience. You sense how relationships act as mirrors, reflecting pieces of yourself back at you, and now those mirrors are gone. You're left to see yourself without distortion. Some nights, that clarity is thrilling. Other nights, it stings. But in the thrill lies transformation. You begin to notice that freedom allows growth in ways dependence cannot. You try hobbies that once felt impractical, cook meals only you would love, rearrange furniture to suit your own flow. These small acts of self-expression become a rebellion against every compromise you used to make. You're not just living alone, you're living for yourself. There will be days when you stumble. The silence may press too hard. The choices may feel overwhelming. The absence of validation may echo like a hollow room. But each time you get up, each time you continue, you're carving out strength. You're learning that freedom isn't about constant joy, but about the dignity of living on your own terms. By the second week, patterns start forming. You wake earlier or later, but always by choice. You notice how your moods shape the house itself. When you're restless, the space feels tight. When you're calm, it expands. You understand that your environment no longer belongs to two people negotiating, but to one person shaping a world that fits. The more you do it, the more intoxicating it becomes. This is the essence of freedom's first taste, realizing you're not just occupying space, you're authoring it. Every choice becomes a declaration. Every silence becomes a canvas. You are alone, yes, but you are also sovereign. And that realization is powerful enough to change the way you see not just your home, but yourself. Days turn into weeks, and the novelty of freedom begins to settle into something more structured. You find yourself creating patterns, not because anyone demands them, but because your own body and mind crave them. The first time you notice it, you're pouring coffee at exactly the same time 2 mornings in a row. Then you realize you always reach for the same mug, the chipped one with the faded print. You tell yourself it doesn't matter, yet you feel uneasy when it's not clean and waiting. That's how routines are born when you live alone, out of small comforts that harden into rituals. At first it feels harmless, even pleasant. You know where everything is because you put it there. You know the sequence of your evenings. Lights on, kettle boiling, maybe a book, maybe the same show you've watched a dozen times. The predictability is soothing. Your nervous system relaxes because no one will break the rhythm, no one will rearrange the furniture, no one will interrupt the flow. Your life starts to fit you like a glove. But with that comfort comes something sharper, rigidity. Without the friction of another person's habits colliding with yours, you stop noticing how tight your patterns become. One evening, a friend calls and asks you to meet spontaneously. Instead of feeling excited, you hesitate. It feels disruptive, even intrusive, to break the cycle you've unconsciously built. You say yes, but part of you resents the disturbance. Freedom, you realize, can quietly turn into confinement when it calcifies into routine. You begin to see how repetition shapes the mind. Alone, you don't have to adapt to another's schedule, so your own becomes both anchor and cage. You always eat at the same time, shop at the same store, sit in the same chair to work. Without external influence, your behaviors loop. And those loops deepen into grooves. You tell yourself you're in control, and you are, but the control is narrow. The world bends inward until it orbits you and you alone. This is the paradox of solitary routines. They create stability, but they also magnify isolation. A shared household forces compromise. Someone else might wake you earlier, cook something you'd never try, or pull you into a conversation you didn't expect. Living alone removes those interruptions. The silence is unbroken, and so is your pattern. Over time, you wonder if comfort is just another word for stagnation. Still, these routines give you something valuable. They provide a sense of safety, a shield against the unpredictability of the outside world. When work is chaotic, when friends cancel plans, when the city feels overwhelming, you return to your apartment knowing exactly what will happen there. The same chair, the same blanket, the same cup of tea, a fortress of repetition. You understand why so many solitary people cling to their rituals. They're a defense against the chaos of life. You notice your body aligning with these rhythms. You wake at certain times without alarms. You know the hour by the way light falls through your windows. You feel hunger on a schedule you didn't consciously design. Your body and space synchronize until they almost become one. It's intimate, even spiritual, to feel this attunement, but it's also fragile. Change one variable, sleep elsewhere, travel unexpectedly, and you feel disoriented, as though you've lost your compass. In these patterns you also confront memory. Habits aren't just about the present, they echo the past. You catch yourself folding laundry the way your mother did, or cleaning dishes in the order an old partner preferred. Even when you live alone, the ghosts of past routines haunt your present ones. It's startling to realize how deeply others have carved their influence into you, even when they're absent. Living alone doesn't erase those imprints, it makes them louder. Yet there's also freedom in rewriting them. You can choose to disrupt the script, to set the table for one in a way that feels celebratory, not pitiful. You can invent rituals that honor your independence. Friday nights for painting, Sunday mornings for dancing barefoot in the kitchen. When no one else is watching, ritual becomes expression rather than obligation. The routines that harden can also transform into practices that nourish. Still, you know the danger. When habits grow too rigid, they stop being tools and start becoming walls. You might avoid invitations because they disrupt your patterns. You might resist new experiences because they feel foreign to your system. Slowly, solitude becomes a loop that circles tighter and tighter until you can't imagine leaving it. That's the hidden cost of living alone, freedom collapsing into fixation. The routines you build are both your scaffolding and your chains. They keep you steady when the outside world wobbles. But they also risk keeping you small. Each day, you walk the fine line between stability and stagnation. You are both architect and prisoner of your rhythms, and the choice of which role dominates depends on whether you notice the difference. As another week passes, you glance around your apartment and see the evidence of these grooves. Books stacked in the same corner, a mug always waiting on the counter, shoes aligned by the door. These objects whisper back your habits, reflecting the life you've quietly built. You wonder if they're signs of resilience or confinement. Perhaps they're both. Living alone teaches you that freedom isn't just the absence of others, it's the discipline to reshape your own patterns before they harden into cages. Silence has a way of expanding when it has no competition. During the first nights, it seemed sharp and unfamiliar, like an intruder lurking in the corners. But as days turn into weeks, the silence grows thicker, almost alive. It presses against you in moments you least expect. When you're washing dishes, when you pause a song on your phone, when you wake in the middle of the night and realize there's no sound of breathing beside you. This is where solitude reveals its hidden side, the echoes that live within silence. At first, the echoes are subtle. You catch yourself hearing the faintest impressions of voices, like memories replaying themselves in the quiet. You think of an old conversation, and it feels so vivid that for a split second you believe the other person is still there. But when you turn, of course the room is empty. Silence doesn't stay silent. It becomes a canvas for the mind, and the mind paints over it with ghosts. These ghosts aren't always haunting. Sometimes they're companions. You might find yourself speaking aloud, narrating your thoughts as if someone were listening. You crack a joke and laugh at your own delivery. You rehearse arguments you'll never have, confess secrets to no one at all, or whisper reassurances into the still air, alone. You discover that silence doesn't erase conversation. It just forces you to hold both sides of it. But other times the echoes are unsettling. In the dead of night, silence amplifies every sound, the drip of the faucet, the groan of the pipes, the shuffle of something outside your window. The house speaks in its own language, and you can't tell if it's harmless or warning. You lie in bed, hyper-aware, your heartbeat matching the rhythm of the shadows. This is when silence feels less like company and more like surveillance. Psychologists call this the presence effect. Your brain, wired for social interaction, creates the illusion of someone else when none exists. Evolution taught us to expect company, so solitude tricks the mind into filling gaps. Some people hear phantom knocks or footsteps. Others simply feel watched. You're not broken if you sense these things. You're human. Solitude exaggerates the instincts you normally ignore. Beyond the phantom presences, silence also deepens your awareness of yourself. In the absence of distraction, your thoughts echo louder, bouncing off the walls of your mind until they demand attention. Regrets resurface, old mistakes play on repeat. Unspoken fears circle back like unanswered calls. Living alone means there's no other voice to dilute these thoughts. No casual banter to drown them out. You're forced to face them directly, sometimes for hours at a time. This can be a crucible or a curse. For some, the echoes in silence become clarity. With no interruptions, you begin to see patterns in your own thinking, to notice which thoughts are true and which are illusions. For others, the echoes grow too loud, distorting reality, convincing you of fears that may not exist. The silence tests you, showing you both your strength and your fractures. During the day, echoes take another form, the lingering sense of other lives around you. You hear laughter drifting from neighbors' windows, footsteps on the stairwell, the hum of conversations in a cafe. These fragments remind you of a world still pulsing with connection. Yet when you return home and shut the door, that pulse fades, leaving you with only your own. The contrast sharpens your solitude. You live among people, but not with them. And still, silence can be addictive. Once you adjust, you start craving it. Crowds feel overwhelming, conversations too noisy, obligations like intrusions. You return to your apartment and the stillness wraps around you like a blanket. The echoes become familiar, even comforting. You find yourself reluctant to give them up, reluctant to share the space with anyone else. What once felt like emptiness now feels like sanctuary. Yet, beneath that comfort, a subtle danger stirs. The more you become accustomed to silence, the harder it is to tolerate disruption. You recoil from invitations, dodge phone calls, avoid commitments. You tell yourself it's peace, but it edges closer to avoidance. The echoes grow stronger when you refuse to balance them with real voices. Without realizing it, silence becomes not just a companion, but a ruler, dictating the terms of your life. You begin to see why some people fear solitude so deeply. It doesn't stay neutral. It amplifies what already lives inside you. If you carry fear, the silence will echo it. If you carry creativity, the silence will magnify it. If you carry grief, the silence will cradle it until it feels endless. Alone, you are both prisoner and warden of your own thoughts. Still, you recognize the truth. Echoes in the silence aren't enemies. They're mirrors. They reflect your hidden conversations, your unresolved battles, your unspoken desires. Living alone forces you to hear them clearly. Whether they terrify you or teach you depends on whether you face them with fear or curiosity. As another night falls and you switch off the lights, the silence rises again, wrapping the room in invisible weight. You hear the faint creak of wood, the distant hum of traffic, your own pulse in your ears, and in those echoes, you realize solitude is never truly quiet. It always speaks. You simply have to decide what story you'll hear in its voice. The silence is never neutral. It echoes with more than your own thoughts. It carries the weight of the world outside, the judgments, the names, the labels that society has etched into the lives of women who choose, or are forced, to live alone. You may not hear them spoken every day, but they lurk in conversations, in sideways glances, in the language itself. Spinster, old maid, cat lady, leftover woman. These words aren't just insults, they're weapons, designed to remind you that living without a man isn't seen as neutral, it's seen as deviant. It doesn't matter how much progress society claims. Even in modern times, when independence is celebrated in theory, you feel the sting of subtle judgments. A colleague jokes about you going home to your cats, even if you don't own one. A relative at a family gathering leans in and asks, "So when are you settling down?" as if your life were on pause, waiting for validation. The labels shift over time, but the undertone remains. Without a man, you are incomplete. The power of these words lies not just in their cruelty, but in their persistence. They seep into culture, shaping how others see you, and eventually, how you see yourself. When you hear the term spinster, you don't just think of someone else, you feel the shadow of it hanging over you, whispering that your life has failed some unspoken test. The word becomes a mirror, reflecting judgment that you didn't ask for, but can't ignore. Language carries history, and every insult reveals the fear behind it. Spinster once referred to women who spun thread, a trade that allowed them to live without marriage. Their independence made them threatening, so the word was twisted into a curse. Cat lady mocks the act of creating companionship outside of men. Leftover woman, common in parts of Asia, reduces lives to expiration dates, as if a woman's worth spoils after 30. Each label exists not to describe reality, but to control it. You might resist, laugh it off, or pretend it doesn't matter, but labels have a way of sticking. They creep into your private thoughts during moments of vulnerability. When you're alone on a Friday night, you hear the echo. Is this what they meant? Is this who I'm becoming? The words sit heavy, not because they're true, but because they carry centuries of repetition, and repetition builds weight. Living alone sharpens your awareness of these labels. In public spaces, you notice how couples are treated differently. At restaurants, hosts ask if you're waiting for someone when you sit by yourself. In supermarkets, you catch the cashier raising eyebrows at a basket filled for one. These small moments remind you that the world has a script, and you've stepped outside of it. The judgment may be quiet, but it's constant. Yet within this awareness lies an unexpected strength. You begin to see the labels for what they truly are, reflections of fear. Society fears women who live without men because such women reveal a possibility that unsettles the established order. A woman who doesn't need a man for validation, survival, or purpose is harder to control. Independence is a threat, so it's mocked, belittled, shamed. The label isn't about you, it's about protecting a system that relies on your dependence. Still, the sting remains. Even the strongest women feel it. Language has a way of burrowing under the skin. That's why survival requires more than ignoring it. It requires reframing it. A cat lady becomes someone who values companionship on her own terms. A spinster becomes someone who chooses craft over compromise. A leftover woman becomes someone who refuses to be consumed. You learn to twist the words back, to wear them as armor instead of chains. But you also learn the importance of community. Living alone doesn't mean living isolated. The more you connect with others who share your path, the more you weaken the power of labels. When you hear their stories, when you laugh together about the same judgments, the sting lessens. A single voice feels like mockery, but a chorus of women transforms the insult into defiance. Over time, you begin to notice a deeper truth. The labels aren't just external, they become internal checkpoints. They force you to ask hard questions about your identity. Am I lonely, or am I liberated? Am I rejected, or am I choosing? These questions sting, but they also sharpen. They push you to define your solitude on your own terms, not society's. The weight of labels is real, but it's also revealing. It shows you where the pressure points lie, where the world fears your independence the most. In recognizing that, you gain clarity. You understand that solitude isn't just about living without a man. It's about resisting the stories that others want to write for you. As you close the blinds one evening, you catch your reflection in the glass. For a moment, the old words creep in, whispering their poison. But then you realize something. Those labels belong to them, not to you. The truth of your life can't be reduced to a single word, and the more you live it, the less power those words hold. In the quiet of your home, you reclaim your story, one unspoken rejection at a time. The labels don't exist in isolation. They're shadows cast by centuries of history. Every time someone calls you a spinster or a cat lady, you're hearing an echo of old stories, old fears, and old punishments that women faced for daring to live outside the orbit of men. Living alone places you in a long line of women whose solitude was treated not as a choice but as a threat. The more you see those patterns, the more you realize how heavy the weight of history really is. Think back to the Middle Ages, when widows often became the most independent women in their communities. Without husbands, they controlled property, money, and choices. At least until neighbors began to whisper. Too much independence made them targets. They were accused of witchcraft, blamed for misfortune, and dragged into trials that ended in flames. The pattern is unmistakable. Women who lived outside men's control were labeled dangerous, and that danger had to be punished. Move forward to the 19th century, when the mad woman in the attic became a trope. Literature and gossip alike painted unmarried or widowed women as unstable, hysterical, incomplete. Doctors prescribed rest cures that locked women away, not because they were truly broken, but because society couldn't fathom them functioning alone. Solitude was rewritten as sickness. Independence became pathology. Even the word hysteria comes from the Greek hystera, meaning womb. Women who didn't conform, who didn't marry, who lived alone, were said to suffer from a wandering womb, a madness born of absence. The body itself was blamed for rejecting the script. History shows that solitude wasn't just frowned upon. It was medicalized, moralized, demonized. Yet despite the punishment, women kept living alone. Some out of necessity, others by choice. In cities, boarding houses filled with single women who worked in factories, schools, and offices. They carved out lives that defied tradition. Though society never stopped muttering, the suspicion remained, if a woman is alone, something must be wrong with her. The Salem witch trials are perhaps the clearest illustration. Many of the accused were women on the margins, widows, unmarried women, women with no male protector. Their solitude made them vulnerable, but it also made them visible. Independence invited scrutiny, and scrutiny turned to accusations. She lives alone, became evidence of guilt. The past may feel distant, but the suspicion still lingers in modern jokes, headlines, and quiet judgments. Living alone today doesn't carry the same literal risk of being burned at the stake, but the shadows remain. Women who step outside the expected script are still described with unease. Journalists write about epidemics of loneliness, often centering women who live alone as cautionary figures. Movies still cast solitary women as bitter, unstable, or incomplete. Even social media reinforces the trope, turning jokes about dying alone with cats into viral punchlines. The flames may be gone, but the stigma smolders. You begin to realize that your solitude isn't just personal, it's historical. When you choose to live without a man, you're participating in a story that stretches across centuries of resistance and suspicion. You're walking paths carved by women who refused or were forced to live differently. Their voices echo in your silence, reminding you that solitude has always been political, always been dangerous, always been misunderstood. This history can feel heavy, but it also reveals something powerful. Women alone have always been symbols of possibility. Witches, widows, spinsters, all were feared because they embodied an alternative. They showed that women could survive, even thrive, without male authority. They threatened the fragile structure of control by simply existing. When you live alone, you inherit both the suspicion and the strength of that legacy. There are moments when you feel this weight directly. Walking through the city at night, you sense how your solitude makes you both invisible and conspicuous. You see headlines about crimes against women and understand why history treated independence as dangerous. But you also see women everywhere carving lives of their own, traveling alone, working alone, aging alone, and realize that you're part of a growing lineage, no longer a rarity but still a reminder of change. The shadows of history aren't meant to trap you, but to sharpen your awareness. They remind you that solitude has never been neutral, and that living alone isn't simply a lifestyle choice, but an act that disrupts old narratives. When you shut your door at night, you're not only protecting yourself, you're claiming space that history tried to deny you. In that recognition, the silence around you changes. It no longer feels empty, but charged, filled with echoes of the women who came before. Their struggles, their resilience, their persecution, all whisper in the quiet corners of your home. You're not alone in your solitude. You're accompanied by centuries of defiance. So when the old labels creep back, when someone mutters cat lady or spinster, you feel the weight of their history, but also the defiance behind it. Those words aren't neutral. They're scars left by the battles women fought simply to live on their own terms. By living alone today, you're carrying that defiance forward. The shadows of history are real, but they're also proof that your solitude matters. The shadows of history are heavy enough, but solitude has another layer of danger that presses closer, sharper, more immediate. Living alone as a woman means carrying the quiet knowledge that the world doesn't always leave you untouched. Behind the locked door, you're free, but you're also vulnerable. You feel this in subtle ways. When you double-check the latch before bed, when you hesitate to open the door for an unexpected knock, when you tense at footsteps echoing in the hallway. Independence comes with vigilance, and vigilance is exhausting. The threat isn't imagined. Statistics confirm what instinct already knows. Women who live alone face higher risks. Burglary, harassment, stalking. These dangers aren't abstractions. They linger in news reports, in whispered warnings, in family members telling you to be careful. While men who live alone may be seen as independent bachelors, women in the same position are often seen as targets. Independence becomes both badge and beacon, a signal that you're free but also alone. You sense it in the smallest routines. Walking home at night, you grip your keys tighter, scanning the shadows, rehearsing escape routes in your head. Entering your apartment, you check behind the door, glance at the windows, listen for sounds that shouldn't be there. These habits become second nature, woven into your movements. They're survival tactics passed down like unspoken inheritance, taught by mothers, friends, the endless warnings tucked between stories of women who didn't come home safe. Inside your own home, the sense of vulnerability can be even sharper. A noise outside the window at 2 a.m. jolts you awake. The silence afterward feels heavier than the sound itself. Was it the wind, a passerby, or something else? Living alone means you don't have another voice to dismiss the fear, no one to murmur, "It's nothing, go back to sleep." You must decide on your own whether to ignore it or to stay awake. Ears straining, heart pounding. The decision is never simple, because the risk is never zero. This constant calculation, threat or harmless, etches itself into your body. Your muscles learn tension. Your heartbeat learns to race at the slightest disturbance. You develop rituals of security, checking locks 3 times, placing objects by the door, leaving a light on overnight. Outsiders may call it paranoia, but you know it's caution. A reasonable response to a world where women's safety is never guaranteed. Yet alongside the fear, there's power. Living alone forces you to become your own protector. You learn to trust your instincts, to read the atmosphere of a street, to sense shifts in tone or movement. You notice details others miss because you've trained yourself to survive. The same hyper-awareness that exhausts you also sharpens you, shaping resilience from vigilance. Still, you wonder about the cost. How much of your energy is consumed by the need to stay alert? How much of your freedom is dulled by the quiet hum of threat that never quite fades? You realize that part of living alone is carrying this invisible weight, a burden men are rarely asked to bear in the same way. It's not just solitude, it's solitude under watch, solitude under suspicion. Then there's the way others perceive you. Some pity you, assuming your aloneness makes you weak. Others envy you, imagining it as pure freedom without understanding the hidden cost. A few, more sinister, see it as an opportunity. This awareness can make your solitude feel fragile, as though your independence balances on the thin edge of safety. Yet in facing this truth, you begin to reclaim some control. You take precautions not out of fear, but out of wisdom. You reinforce your locks, not because you're powerless, but because you're responsible for your own safety. You learn self-defense, keep emergency contacts close, cultivate routines that protect you. These aren't signs of weakness, they're signs of strength. To live alone as a woman is to live with both eyes open, fully aware of the world's shadows and your own determination to outlast them. But still, there are nights when fear seeps in anyway. Nights when every creak feels like a warning, when every gust of wind becomes a whisper of danger. On those nights, you understand the deeper truth. Solitude doesn't just expose you to physical threats, it exposes you to the endless task of managing them alone. You bear not only the fear, but the responsibility of navigating it without another presence to share the weight. This is the paradox of threat and vulnerability. Your solitude both strengthens you and exposes you. It teaches you resilience while demanding constant vigilance. It offers freedom while reminding you of risk. As you lock your door again before bed, you know that every woman who has ever lived alone has carried this same dual awareness. It's not paranoia, not weakness. It's survival written into the fabric of independence. The dangers of solitude may hover outside the door, but another truth waits within your own skin. Your body doesn't forget the life you're living. When you live alone, every choice you make, from how you eat to how you sleep, etches itself into your biology. The body keeps score, and solitude writes its lessons with both subtlety and force. At first you notice it in sleep. Without another person in the bed, you can spread across the mattress, free from elbows and snoring. You fall asleep earlier some nights, later on others, unshackled from anyone else's schedule. For a time, it feels luxurious. Yet the quiet is louder when you're trying to rest. The absence of another heartbeat, another breath, can make nights feel longer. Your body responds with shallow sleep, ears pricked for sounds, muscles tightening at every creak. Freedom in sleep comes with vigilance in dreams. Your eating habits also shift. No longer bound by shared meals, you choose according to mood rather than routine. Some nights you feast on elaborate creations, taking joy in flavors that please no palate but your own. Other nights you eat cereal from the box. Too tired to care, your body feels these swings, without a partner's rhythm to steady you. Your appetite becomes a mirror of your emotional landscape, feast and famine, celebration and neglect. Living alone reveals how much food is tied not only to hunger, but to companionship. Stress takes new forms too. In a shared life, burdens are divided, sometimes unevenly, but still carried together. Alone, every bill, every repair, every decision rests on your shoulders. A leaking faucet isn't just an annoyance, it's a problem you alone must solve. Your body registers this weight in clenched jaws, in tightened shoulders, in the restless tension that lingers even when you sit still. Independence strengthens your resolve, but it also strains your nervous system. Yet solitude also creates space for healing. Without the constant friction of another's habits, your body finds its own rhythm. You notice how you prefer to stretch in the mornings, how sunlight through the window lifts your mood, how walking alone becomes a kind of meditation. You pay attention to sensations that once went unnoticed, the warmth of tea in your hands, the pulse of your steps on pavement, the rise and fall of your own breathing. Alone, your body isn't an afterthought, it becomes a compass. There are days when solitude pushes you toward lethargy. With no one to witness your actions, it's easy to skip exercise. to stay in pajamas until evening, to let your body slip into neglect. But there are also days when solitude pushes you toward discipline. You run farther because no one is waiting at home. You cook healthier meals because you finally listen to your own needs. Living alone reveals the truth. Your body responds directly to your choices, without the buffering influence of another. Hormones play their part as well. Stress hormones spike when you feel unsafe, lowering immunity and sapping energy. Oxytocin, the hormone of connection, flows less freely without touch or companionship, leaving your body hungrier for contact. But dopamine, released in small victories, in creative bursts, in pleasures chosen entirely by you, becomes a lifeline. You begin to understand that solitude reshapes your chemistry. The body adapts, but it also signals what it craves. Aging adds another layer to this score. Studies show that people who live alone face higher risks of certain illnesses, not just because of genetics, but because solitude magnifies habits. If you neglect your health, there's no one else to catch it early. If you thrive, there's no one to interrupt your momentum. Your body reflects your solitude in sharper contrasts, either strengthened by the freedom to care for yourself or weakened by the absence of accountability. Still, solitude allows intimacy with your own body that many never achieve. You notice small aches sooner, understand your cycles more clearly, feel the connection between emotion and muscle tension with precision. You begin to sense when you need rest, when you need movement, when you need nourishment. No one else tells you. Your body speaks directly, and you learn to listen. There's power in this awareness. You begin to see that living alone isn't just a mental journey, but a physical one. Your body adapts, resists, sometimes rebels, but always records. Every choice, every habit, every silence leaves a mark. The body keeps score, but it also keeps offering second chances. Each day you wake in solitude is an invitation to write a new rhythm, to care for yourself in ways no one else can. The truth is simple and profound. Your body is both your companion and your witness. It bears the weight of solitude. It celebrates the freedom. It warns of danger. It rewards resilience. Living alone means learning to respect that witness, to understand that independence is written not just in your choices, but in your very flesh. Silence doesn't just shape your body, it shapes your inner landscape. When you live alone, the mind becomes both stage and audience, a theater where every thought has room to echo. With no other voices to interrupt, your inner dialogue grows louder, sharper, more elaborate. Sometimes it feels like freedom, sometimes it feels like entrapment. Either way, the mind begins to perform in ways you never noticed before. You catch yourself narrating small actions. I'll put the kettle on. I should check the mail. Don't forget the laundry. These murmurs replace conversations you once had with another. It's not madness, it's adaptation. The mind craves dialogue, so it invents it. You become both speaker and listener, your own companion in the quiet. But solitude also magnifies the deeper hidden scripts. Old regrets resurface like actors stepping back into the spotlight. You replay arguments from years ago, delivering sharper lines, crafting victories you never claimed. You revisit relationships, imagining how they might have unfolded differently. Alone, the mind doesn't just remember, it rehearses. It edits the past and speculates on the future, creating endless versions of yourself in its private theater. Some performances are comforting. You daydream about possibilities, inventing stories where you thrive, where you love without compromise, where you live boldly. These fantasies are fuel, giving you hope and creativity, but others are darker. The mind whispers fears. What if something happens to you? What if no one notices? What if you never escape this silence? These lines repeat until they sound like truths. Living alone forces you to confront how convincing your own voice can be when it turns against you. Psychologists call this rumination, the tendency to cycle thoughts endlessly without resolution. In solitude, rumination finds fertile ground. Without distraction, worries loop and intensify. What began as a small doubt, did I lock the door, spirals into visions of catastrophe. What began as a moment of sadness becomes a story of lifelong failure. The theater of the mind blurs the line between imagination and reality. Yet this stage isn't only a place of torment, it's also a laboratory. Solitude gives you uninterrupted space to create, to imagine, to build ideas. Many artists, writers, and thinkers have thrived in aloneness because the mind, free from constant noise, learns to generate its own music. You discover that imagination expands when given silence. Stories form, solutions appear, connections spark. The same solitude that magnifies fear also magnifies creativity. This duality is constant. Your mind becomes both saboteur and savior. 1 hour, it convinces you that you're doomed to invisibility. The next, it shows you visions of possibility, encouraging you to write, to paint, to dream. You begin to realize that solitude doesn't change the mind, it unmasks it. The voices were always there, only now, without interruption, you hear them fully. Over time, you learn strategies to navigate this theater. You notice which scripts are illusions and which are insights. You practice stepping back, watching thoughts instead of clinging to them. Meditation, journaling, even speaking aloud to the empty room become tools for managing the flood. You discover that the mind quiets when it feels heard. Ignored, it screams. Attended to, it softens. Still, the performances never stop entirely. Some nights, the theater is filled with shadows. You lie awake, your mind conjuring every possible danger, every mistake, every failure. You try to silence it, but that only makes it louder. Eventually, you realize that solitude demands acceptance. You can't banish the voices, but you can learn to live alongside them. In that acceptance lies something unexpected. Intimacy. You begin to know yourself more deeply than ever before. You recognize patterns in your thoughts, recurring themes, characters who appear again and again in your mental plays. You see your fears for what they are, your hopes for what they promise, your memories for what they've taught you. Alone, the theater of the mind becomes a mirror, showing you who you are when no one else is watching. Some days, this intimacy feels heavy. You wish for distraction, for someone else's voice to drown out your own. But other days, it feels liberating. You're not running from yourself anymore. You're watching, listening, learning. The theater is no longer just performance, it's revelation. Living alone teaches you this truth. The mind will always speak, always perform, always echo. You can't control the scripts completely, but you can decide how to respond. You can let fear dominate the stage, or you can invite creativity to take the lead. Either way, the show goes on. In the silence of your solitude, you sit in the front row, both witness and participant, learning what it means to share your life with no one but yourself. Independence is sweet when it's a choice. You set your own rhythms, shape your space, carry only your own burdens. But there comes a point when you feel the sharper edges of freedom, when the very independence you protect begins to bite back. Living alone without a man means carrying the full weight of survival, economic, social, and emotional, with no one else to lean on when the load grows heavy. The first bite is financial. Rent, utilities, groceries, repairs, all fall solely on your shoulders. There's no splitting of costs, no shared cushion. A leaky roof isn't just an inconvenience, it's a bill you alone must pay. A sudden illness isn't just a disruption, it's an expense you alone must bear. Freedom grants sovereignty, but sovereignty requires resources. You learn quickly that solitude isn't free. It demands constant payment in dollars, energy, and vigilance. You see this most clearly in small, everyday choices. Couples might think nothing of dining out, splitting the cost, laughing over shared plates. You hesitate, knowing that one meal out equals 2 or 3 home-cooked dinners for you alone. Travel becomes a calculation. Can you afford the single occupancy surcharge? Even grocery shopping reminds you of your aloneness. As bulk deals mock your solitary basket, independence carries a price tag, and it's written in bold ink across every receipt. The second bite is social. You find yourself excluded from subtle rituals that society reserves for couples. Invitations are phrased differently. Bring your husband, your boyfriend, your partner. When you arrive alone, you sense the sideways glances, the whispered questions. Even in friendship circles, you notice how conversations tilt towards shared domestic life, kids, partners, anniversaries. Your silence in those moments feels louder than any words. Independence, though celebrated in theory, is often met with suspicion in practice. The third bite is emotional. Without a partner, you have no built-in witness to your life. Achievements pass quietly. No one to pour a glass of wine when you get a promotion. No one to sit with you when grief strikes. You become both celebrant and comforter, clapping for yourself in empty rooms, holding your own hand through heartbreak. There's strength in this. Yes, but there's also a sting. Independence forces you to be your own support system, even when you long for another presence to share the weight. These costs accumulate, and sometimes they overwhelm. Bills stack higher than your income. Social gatherings feel hollow. The silence after a long day becomes unbearable. You question whether independence is worth the price. You remember the comfort of shared burdens, the ease of companionship, the way life felt softer when someone else stood beside you. Living alone without a man gives you control, but it also strips away the safety nets woven into partnership. Yet you also discover resilience in these sharp edges. You learn skills you never thought you'd need: how to fix a broken appliance, how to budget with ruthless precision, how to negotiate with landlords, mechanics, and banks. You build networks of support, friends who step in where family or partners once would. You craft your own rituals of celebration, lighting candles for yourself, raising a glass to your own victories. Independence bites, but it also toughens. Each challenge faced alone becomes proof of your capacity. Still, you can't deny the toll. the exhaustion of constant responsibility, the ache of invisible labor, the loneliness of carrying burdens unshared. These aren't signs of weakness. They're the realities of solitary living. Acknowledging them doesn't mean you regret your path. It means you see it clearly. Independence isn't endless freedom. It's freedom tangled with cost. The truth is this: when you live alone without a man, you walk a narrow line between empowerment and depletion. Some days, the balance tips toward liberation. You revel in your autonomy, savor the sweetness of choice. Other days, the balance tips toward burden. Your independence feels like a weight pressing on your chest. Both realities are true. Independence isn't a single story. It's a shifting terrain, a landscape of peaks and valleys. You begin to see that the bite of independence isn't a flaw, but a teacher. It shows you where your limits are, where your resilience stretches, where your vulnerabilities lie. It forces you to confront the illusion society sells, that solitude is either total bliss or total despair. The truth is more complex. Independence bites, but it also feeds. It wounds, but it also strengthens. It isolates, but it also reveals. So you learn to live with the paradox. You accept the costs even as you celebrate the gains. You build systems to soften the blows, communities to share the burdens, habits to protect your energy. Independence may bite back, but you bite back too, proving again and again that you can endure, adapt and rise. Independence may bite, but it also breeds a kind of power that societies have always feared. Women who live alone, outside the orbit of men, have long occupied a strange position. Admired by some, distrusted by many, and quietly mythologized as figures of danger, mystery, or rebellion. The margins they inhabit aren't empty. They're charged, fertile, and unsettling. To live without a man is to embody a possibility that unsettles the established order, and that possibility has always sparked fascination and resistance. History is littered with examples. Think of the so-called witches, widows, healers, and women on the fringes who lived without male protection. Their solitude made them symbols of independence, but also of threat. To neighbors, their aloneness suggested secrets. To authorities, it suggested rebellion. They were targeted not simply for what they did, but for what they represented. A life unanchored from patriarchal control. Independence, even in its quietest form, became power, and power demanded punishment. Move forward, and you see the same pattern in different clothing. The flapper of the 1920s, short-haired, unmarried, living in city apartments, was celebrated in magazines as modern and free, yet condemned in pulpits as immoral and reckless. Women who chose to live outside traditional households were labeled dangerous, not because of what they lacked, but because of what they demonstrated, that survival and joy were possible without a husband. Their visibility challenged the idea that a woman's worth depended on being chosen. Even today, the narrative persists. Look at how media frames single women in their 30s, 40s, 50s. Either they're pitied, portrayed as lonely, desperate, still searching, or they're villainized, depicted as cold, selfish, or threatening to the family structure. The cultural script leaves little room for neutrality. A woman living alone can't simply exist. She must be explained, justified, or corrected. Her independence is framed as a question mark, a disruption to the narrative of woman as wife, woman as mother. But within these margins, power grows. Solitude strips away certain forms of validation, yes, but it also removes constraints. Without the constant negotiation of partnership, you cultivate your own authority. You decide how to spend your money, how to design your days, how to express your desires. These choices may seem mundane, but collectively, they build sovereignty. Living alone gives you a life shaped by your own hand, and that autonomy radiates outward, visible even to those who resent it. That visibility is why solitary women have always drawn fascination. They become symbols onto which others project fear, envy, or curiosity. Some see them as tragic figures, others as aspirational icons. Either way, they refuse to be ignored. The woman who lives alone holds up a mirror to society, asking an unspoken question. If I can do this, why can't you? And that question unsettles. There's also erotic power in the margins. Independent women have often been painted as dangerously seductive, their solitude imagined as a lure. In literature and film, the mysterious woman alone becomes a trope, desired, feared, never fully understood. This projection is less about the women themselves and more about the unease they provoke. Desire and fear intertwine when a woman exists beyond male control. But power in the margins isn't always comfortable. It means carrying the weight of others' projections, enduring suspicion, and navigating envy disguised as pity. It means living with the knowledge that your choices will be politicized. Your lifestyle turned into a statement even when you didn't intend it. To live alone as a woman is to be seen not just as an individual, but as a symbol. Yet you begin to reclaim that symbolism. You see the power in unsettling others, in refusing the expected script, in embodying a possibility that society has worked so hard to erase. You understand why solitary women in history were feared. They threatened systems of control simply by existing. You take strength from that legacy. Your solitude isn't just personal, it's political. This realization shifts your perspective. When someone calls you selfish for living alone, you hear their fear of your independence. When someone pities you, you see their discomfort with the possibility of a woman thriving outside the norms. Their reactions say less about you and more about the fragility of the systems you disrupt. Living alone exposes the fault lines in cultural expectations, and you become both witness and participant in that exposure. Power in the margins isn't absolute, but it's undeniable. It may come with suspicion, projection, even danger, but it also brings clarity, resilience, and influence. By inhabiting solitude, you expand the definition of what a woman's life can be. In doing so, you claim a truth that history has tried to bury, that independence itself is a form of power, and that power can't be erased simply because it exists outside the frame. Even power in the margins can't erase the need for connection. Living alone doesn't mean living without longing, and solitude eventually forces you to confront the question, if not a man, then who, or what, fills the empty spaces? The truth is that women who live alone often construct companions, weaving threads of comfort and intimacy from sources that society overlooks or dismisses. These companions may not breathe, but they carry presence. They may not speak, but they answer a need. Pets are the most obvious companions. A cat curled at the edge of the bed, a dog waiting faithfully at the door. These lives tether you to routines, soften the edges of silence, remind you that you're not completely unseen. The world mocks this bond with cruel shorthand, cat lady, as if love given to animals is less real than love given to men. But anyone who has felt the weight of a purring body against their chest knows the truth. Companionship isn't diminished by its form. It's nurtured by presence, loyalty, and the quiet exchange of care. Objects, too, take on companionship. A well-worn chair becomes more than furniture. It becomes a confidant, shaped to your body, always waiting. A particular mug feels like a friend, its chipped handle familiar against your fingers. You speak to plants as though they're roommates, naming them, worrying when their leaves droop, celebrating their growth. These rituals may look strange to outsiders, but they create anchors in the vast sea of solitude. They remind you that relationship isn't limited to human form. Faith and spirituality often step in as companions as well. You light candles, whisper prayers, or meditate in the stillness, feeling the presence of something larger than yourself. In solitude, belief becomes intimate. There's no audience, no performance, only you and whatever you choose to trust in. The divine, the ancestral, the unseen become your companions, filling the silence with unseen witness. Living alone can sharpen this sense of connection, making the invisible feel palpable. Art offers another form of companionship. You play music that echoes through the empty rooms, and suddenly the silence is filled with voices, instruments, emotion. A favorite novel becomes a reliable friend, its characters returning whenever you open the pages. You write, paint, or sculpt, and the creations become companions themselves, carrying pieces of you back to you. In these acts, solitude becomes less about absence and more about dialogue, between you and the work, between you and the worlds you build. The digital world, too, offers companionship, though it carries its own paradox. Online, you can connect instantly. Messages, calls, video chats that collapse distance. Social media fills your feed with endless noise, allowing you to dip into community whenever loneliness bites too hard. But these connections are fleeting, often shallow, sometimes leaving you emptier than before. Digital companions soothe in the moment, but rarely satisfy the deeper hunger. Still, they're part of the patchwork, a reminder that you're not cut off completely. Even your own imagination becomes a companion. You invent conversations, picture futures, create personas to walk beside you. Sometimes you rehearse the life you might have had with a partner. Other times, you imagine the life you're building without one. Fantasy isn't escape, it's sustenance. In solitude, the mind constructs company because company is part of being human. The theater of your imagination doesn't only replay fears, it also stages companionships that help you endure. Outsiders may mock these substitutes, but they miss the point. Companionship isn't about conforming to one script, it's about connection, however it takes form. A dog's wagging tail, a plant thriving under your care, a character in a story, a divine whisper in prayer, each provides the same essential truth. You're not entirely alone. The bonds may not look conventional, but they're real, and they sustain you. There's resilience in these constructed companions. They don't betray, they don't demand, they don't diminish your independence. They offer comfort without compromise. They may not replace human intimacy, but they remind you that intimacy isn't one-dimensional. It's found in loyalty, in care, in recognition. Solitude teaches you to recognize it everywhere. Still, you understand the limits. A pet can't hold your hand in grief. A song can't argue with you and sharpen your perspective. A prayer can't fix a leaking pipe. Constructed companions soothe, but they can't fully substitute. They're part of the patchwork, not the whole cloth. Living alone means learning to cherish what they give without expecting them to fill every void. Yet in their presence, whether animal, object, art, faith, or imagination, you feel something essential. Companionship isn't defined by convention. It's defined by connection. Living alone without a man doesn't mean living without bonds. It means redefining them. You create your own networks of comfort, your own constellations of intimacy. In doing so, you prove that companionship, like independence, is something you can shape with your own hands. Resilience isn't born in ease. It's forged in tension, in the quiet push and pull between vulnerability and strength. Living alone without a man forces you to discover this dance of resilience, a choreography of small habits and choices that allow solitude to become not only bearable, but beautiful. At first, you may stumble, uncertain of the steps, but over time the rhythm emerges and you begin to move with it. The first step is structure. You learn that resilience grows in routine, but not the rigid kind that cages you, the kind that grounds you. Morning rituals become anchors, making the bed, brewing coffee, opening curtains to let light flood in. These actions are small, but they steady you, reminding you that each day begins with choice. They give shape to time, transforming silence into a framework you can lean against. The second step is connection, deliberate and intentional. You reach out to friends, not waiting for loneliness to overwhelm you, but weaving relationships into your weeks like threads in a tapestry. A lunch date, a phone call, a message exchanged late at night, all become lifelines. You learn that resilience isn't isolation. It's knowing when to draw strength from others and when to stand steady alone. The third step is care. You tend to your body, not because anyone else is watching, but because you deserve it. You cook nourishing meals, stretch your limbs, walk in fresh air. You create rituals of pleasure, a hot bath with music, a candle lit while you read, a glass of wine savored without rush. Care becomes resilience when it's chosen for yourself, not as performance but as devotion. The fourth step is creativity. Solitude offers time, and time becomes a canvas. You paint, write, garden, dance, sing badly to the walls. These acts aren't about perfection, but expression. They transform silence into dialogue, emptiness into presence. When you create, you remind yourself that you're more than survival. Your imagination, energy, force. Resilience isn't only about enduring, it's about making beauty in the cracks. The fifth step is acceptance. You stop fighting the loneliness as if it were failure. You let it arrive, sit with it, feel its edges. Some nights it presses hard, and you ache for touch, for laughter, for a voice beside you. But instead of seeing it as proof of inadequacy, you recognize it as part of being human. Loneliness doesn't erase your independence. It simply reminds you that connection matters. Accepting this truth softens the sting and prevents it from ruling you. As these steps repeat, the dance of resilience grows steadier. You find joy in small victories, fixing something on your own, paying a bill without panic, learning to sleep through the night without fear. Each success becomes a step in the dance, a reminder that solitude hasn't broken you. It has taught you to bend, to sway, to move with life's rhythm. Resilience also means redefining success. You stop measuring your life by traditional markers, marriage, children, shared milestones, and start measuring it by your own growth. Did you face fear and continue anyway? Did you find laughter even in silence? Did you build a life that reflects your values, not society's script? These become your metrics, and in them you find strength. But resilience isn't constant. There are days when you falter, when exhaustion overtakes discipline, when loneliness feels heavier than freedom. You may cry into your pillow, let dishes pile, avoid the world, and that too is resilience, not in denial, but in honesty. Resilience isn't perfection. It's the willingness to stumble and still rise, to feel the weight and still move forward. Over time, the dance becomes natural. You move between solitude and connection, discipline and rest, expression and silence. You learn to listen to yourself, to trust your instincts, to adapt when the rhythm changes. Resilience stops feeling like survival and starts feeling like art, the art of shaping a life that is both tender and strong, vulnerable and unbreakable. This dance doesn't erase the challenges of living alone. Bills still arrive, silence still lingers, threats still hover at the edges, but resilience shifts how you meet them. You're no longer caught off guard. You're prepared, steady, fluid. You know that storms will come. But you also know you can weather them. The dance has taught you not only to stand, but to move. Living alone without a man doesn't make you invulnerable. It makes you resilient, and resilience, once learned, can't be taken away. It's woven into your body, etched into your mind, carried in every step you take. The dance is yours alone, and it will carry you through every season of solitude, every shadow of fear, every echo of silence. There's another paradox that rises as you move deeper into solitary life: the way visibility shifts. Living alone makes you unseen in some spaces and hypervisible in others. You drift between invisibility and spotlight, anonymity and scrutiny, depending on the eyes around you. This paradox can be confusing, even dizzying, because it forces you to navigate a world that can't decide whether to erase you or expose you. Invisibility shows itself first. At family gatherings, conversations revolve around couples, children, anniversaries. You sit quietly as stories of shared lives dominate the table, and no one asks about your solitude beyond the tired question, so when are you going to settle down? Your days, your routines, your triumphs slip past unnoticed, as though a life lived alone is less real, less valid, less worthy of attention. You become a shadow in the background, the one who is fine, the one whose details are assumed irrelevant. In professional spaces, invisibility often follows. Employers may assume you're endlessly available because you have no partner or children to anchor your time. Colleagues overlook your milestones because they don't fit the familiar script. A birthday celebrated alone doesn't spark office chatter the way an engagement or a baby announcement does. Independence becomes camouflage. Your life is flattened into silence because it doesn't echo with conventional milestones. Yet paradoxically, there are moments when you're too visible. At a restaurant, sitting alone at a table, you feel the glances, some pity, some curiosity, some suspicion. Strangers project stories onto you. The woman waiting for someone who never shows. The lonely soul with no company. The eccentric who prefers isolation. At the grocery store, your basket for one draws attention, as if solitude itself were an oddity. Walking into certain social events without a partner, you feel eyes linger too long, scanning you for flaws or explanations. Hypervisibility extends to danger as well. Walking home at night, your aloneness becomes a spotlight. Predators see it, sense it, and exploit it. You become visible in ways you don't choose, in ways that make your independence feel fragile. The world alternates between ignoring you and watching you too closely, between dismissing you and dissecting you. This paradox isn't new, it's centuries old. Solitary women were often erased from records, their lives undocumented, their contributions forgotten. Yet at the same time, they were marked as different, made examples of, scrutinized with suspicion. The same woman could be both invisible in history books and hypervisible in gossip, both ignored and condemned. You feel that same duality in modern times, even if the forms have changed. Living in this paradox forces you to find new strategies. Sometimes you lean into invisibility, savoring the freedom it brings. You slip unnoticed into a cafe, lose yourself in a book, relish the anonymity of being unremarkable. In these moments, invisibility becomes sanctuary. You're free from judgment, free from expectation, free to exist without explanation. Other times, you confront visibility directly. You sit tall at the restaurant table, meeting glances without shame. You speak openly about your choices, refusing to shrink under scrutiny. You learn to hold your ground in spaces that spotlight you, transforming exposure into declaration. Hypervisibility, when claimed, becomes defiance. You say with your presence, "Yes, I am here, and I am whole." Still, the paradox weighs on you. There are days when invisibility feels like erasure, when you long to be seen, acknowledged, celebrated. And there are days when hypervisibility feels like intrusion, when you wish to fade into the crowd without explanation. You live at the edge of both, never fully choosing, always balancing. But perhaps the paradox isn't a flaw. Perhaps it's the truth of independence. Living alone means stepping outside the standard frame, and life outside the frame will always confuse the gaze of others. They won't know whether to dismiss you or dissect you. They won't know whether to pity you or fear you. So you exist in both states, unseen and too seen, erased and exaggerated. With time, you begin to see the paradox as a kind of freedom. Invisibility allows you privacy. Hypervisibility grants you impact. Between the two, you carve a path that belongs to no one but you. The paradox won't vanish, but it will teach you resilience, self-definition, and the ability to live without waiting for society to decide how to see you. So each time you walk through the world, sometimes invisible, sometimes lit like a stage, you remember you're not here to fit the gaze. You're here to live the truth of your solitude, to claim both shadow and spotlight as part of your story. At last, the layers converge. The silence, The routines, the echoes, the labels, the shadows of history, the dangers, the companions, the resilience, the paradoxes. Each thread you've carried through solitude weaves together into a single fabric. In that fabric lies the truth about women who live alone without a man. It's not simple. It's not a story of pure freedom or pure despair. It's a story of contradictions, heavy and liberating, frightening and empowering, isolating and expansive. The truth is that solitude strips away the illusions. Without another voice to mirror, you meet yourself in full. You hear your fears louder, feel your longings sharper, taste your independence more vividly. You discover what you can endure and what you can't, what you cherish and what you avoid. Living alone forces you into a kind of intimacy with yourself that partnership often dilutes. You can't hide from your patterns. They sit beside you in the empty chair. You also learn that solitude is never entirely silent. It carries the whispers of history, the widows turned witches, the spinsters turned cautionary tales, the women erased from records yet remembered in rumors. Their shadows shape your experience, reminding you that solitude isn't neutral but charged with centuries of suspicion and resilience. Every night you lock your door. You continue their legacy. You prove again that a woman can live without a man and still live fully. But solitude also sharpens the awareness of danger. You carry keys like weapons, scan shadows for threats, feel your heartbeat quicken at midnight knocks. Living alone means living with vigilance, never forgetting the vulnerability written into your independence. This truth is sobering, but it's also empowering. It teaches you to trust your instincts, to claim authority over your safety, to refuse to be naive. At the same time, solitude forces you to create. You build companions out of pets, objects, art, faith, imagination. You craft routines, rituals, and resilience. You celebrate victories quietly, but fiercely. You learn to nourish your body, to discipline your mind, to honor your emotions. Independence bites, but you bite back, proving that survival can be transformed into strength. The paradoxes never leave you. You're invisible in some rooms, hypervisible in others. You're free and yet bound by cost. You're strong and yet tender with longing, but these contradictions don't weaken you, they make you whole. To live alone without a man is to live in the tension between truths, refusing to flatten your existence into a single narrative. And finally, solitude unveils the deepest truth. You are enough, not because you reject men, not because you deny companionship, but because your worth isn't defined by absence or presence. It's defined by the life you shape, the resilience you cultivate, the story you claim. Alone, you discover that you are never truly incomplete. The silence doesn't diminish you, it reveals you. As you sit in your room, the night pressing gently against the windows, you feel the weight of this journey. You feel the echoes of every woman who lived alone before you, the strength of every survival, the courage of every choice. You feel the quiet power of your own breath, steady and certain. And you know that the truth about women who live alone without a man isn't a secret, isn't a tragedy, isn't a punchline. It's a testament. A testament to resilience, to autonomy, to survival, to joy. A testament to the possibility of shaping a life outside the script. A testament to the fact that solitude isn't the absence of life. It's a different way of living it. And in that truth, you're not diminished. You're unveiled. Now the house grows quiet again. The doors are locked, the lights dimmed, the rhythm of another day winding to a close. You sit with the silence, no longer startled by it, no longer fearing it. It's familiar now, a presence rather than a void. The journey of solitude has carried you through fear, through routine, through echoes and labels, through vulnerability and power, and now, at the edge of the night, it carries you to rest. Perhaps you remember the first night, how heavy the silence felt, how sharp the shadows seemed. Perhaps you remember the sting of names, the ache of loneliness, the weight of responsibility. But you also remember the victories, the meals cooked for yourself with care, the laughter that rose unexpectedly, the resilience you discovered in the quiet. Living alone has been no simple story. It has been a test, a mirror, a crucible, a sanctuary. The truth about women who live alone without a man is that their lives aren't defined by absence, but by presence. The presence of strength, of survival, of creativity, of courage. These lives aren't lesser. They aren't waiting to be completed. They are whole in themselves, complicated and luminous. So as you lie back tonight, letting the silence wrap around you, remember this: solitude isn't emptiness. It's space, space you've claimed, space you've filled, space that reflects the fullness of who you are. Let the echoes soften, let the body rest, let the mind release its theatre. Tomorrow will come, and you'll meet it again, sovereign in your own life. Like and subscribe for more contents like this. Good night.